I'm joined here. We're honored to be here actually with my uncle, Uncle Gary, and Uncle Gary is 99 years young. His birthday was August 18th, 1922, and Gary has all kinds of life stories and wisdom to share. And what I'm as impressed with anything is how sharp Gary still is in his 99 years of age, as well as how not just how sharp your mind is, but how what a joyful human being you are. It is always a pleasure. It's an honor and a pleasure to always be with you and around you. And you always you always seem to people gravitate towards you. You just have such a great personality. And I guess with your age now, Gary, what do you attribute just having such a healthy mind and that wonderful personality of yours?
Well, I've obviously been very fortunate and very lucky, and I've been blessed more than I deserve. But I guess if we want to be a little, I guess, flippant, so to speak, I told people that I drank a lot of coffee while I was in the Navy. I also did not smoke, which I think probably was a health feature.
Mm.
And after I started around with a cup of coffee almost in my hand all the time, that I believe I had one finger that was sort of bent because it held the coffee cup. But then one day I said, I'm not feeling too good. I think I better go see the doctor. And then when I said I go see the doctor, he says, going to ask me several questions. Well, do you smoke? Well, I was going to say no. The answer is no. He said, well, do you drink? I said, well, no. The answer is no. Do you eat a lot? I said, well, I eat practically everything put in front of me. But he said, well, do you drink coffee excessively? I said, man, if I drink coffee all the time. And he says, maybe you ought to cut down on your coffee. So I cut down on my coffee and had 1 cup of tea a day. I never had to go see the doctor for that purpose. So I looked at those features, and a little later on, I started telling people that, hey, maybe you ought to take some ivermectin, which is something that you give to, I believe it's to hogs or something to prolong their life. And I says, maybe a little of that ivermectin would help a human being a little bit. So a little bit of that would help out a lot. So if we put all this together, I guess maybe that might get you up to 99 years. But half of that, I just think the good Lord's been looking out for me. And I think I've been the subject of a lot of prayer by my mother, and a lot of prayer by people that knew me, and people that loved me, and people that were interested in my life, and so forth. Does that help out a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you always just having a good spirit, keeping in good spirits, probably has something to do with it as well. And so I wanted to, you and I have been speaking for a little bit now, and you talked about the fact that you grew up, you're one of 6 children. You grew up in I guess you'd say a small or a farming community. Your family was farmers and grew up in Pembroke, North Carolina. And you grew up and you were actually just in a schoolhouse, 1-room schoolhouse, but there were multiple grades. And so obviously that wasn't the ideal education, and 11th grade was actually the last grade. Then there wasn't a 12th grade like there is now. and you moved on and you were enlisted in World War II. You were in the Korean War. You were in the Navy, and so with your time there in the Navy, and you were on these ships, were you mostly a captain? What were you mostly doing on these ships?
Well, now you got to keep in mind that once you start out in the Navy, you start out with probably the lowest rank which there is. And of course, in the Army, it would be a second lieutenant. In the Navy, we were called ensigns, ENSIGNS. That was a rank. In other words, you finish college, or while you're in college, you were called a midshipman. As soon as you're commissioned as an ensign. And as an ensign, that's the starting rank. And theoretically, you don't know anything except the difference between right and left, which is starboard and port. But you're assigned a ship, and you have people older than you are, both officer and enlisted, that nurtures you along based on your own eagerness to say get ahead and learn. So I started out as a division officer on the destroyer, and after about a year during the war, I became a lieutenant junior grade, which it was the first promotion that I had. And as a lieutenant junior grade, I became a division officer, and then the first thing you know, I was a department head on the destroyer. And of course, we stood all kinds of watches while you're underway. Combat information, junior officer of the deck, main battery control, where you're shooting the guns, and what we call condition watches, which we always stated some degree or some level of readiness to, if we were suddenly attacked, could defend yourself. And then if you're really in a big battle situation, we went to something we call general quarters. And by the time the war ended, I was a department head, which gave me titles of being a first lieutenant, which meant I was in charge of all the like deck force operations. And I was the damage control officer, which meant if we got hit by some enemy action, we repaired the damage to the ship. But fortunately, we went scathed through the war without any any battle damage. And of course, we were in several situations where we were under attack by aircraft. And latter part of the war, we were under attack by kamikazes, and fortunately, we were able to shoot down several planes before they attacked us. But we were on what we called a radar picket station at Okinawa, which meant we were stationed halfway between Okinawa and Japan, which is a route kamikaze planes came down. But we had fighter planes attached to our ship that we used to fend off attacking aircraft. But we had several ships in our squadron that were sunk, several ships were damaged, but good Lord was looking out for us. And as I said, we came through World War II unscathed. Now, I was on active duty during the Korean War, but I never actually participated in the combat in the Korean War, because at that particular time I was in the Atlantic Fleet, and we spent a lot of time in the European theater, mostly in the Mediterranean. And by the time I was a lieutenant commander, I was captain of a destroyer escort, which we call a DE. And that was my first command situation. And when you think about egos just a little bit, we took a ship that was a very poor performer, and won the Battle Efficiency Award. And that particular ship was a sort of like a best of the squadron, so to speak, which we were very proud of. And then later on, I was in a lot of shore duty, and I went to what we called a general line school, which was in Rhode Island. It's a year of schooling, and things that I had not actually participated in, like communications or engineering. We had schooling in those particular subjects, and I had duty in Washington 3 or 4 times, in the Pentagon, and the Hydrographic Office, and Military Sea Lift, and Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. And I also actually had command of what they called a radar picket destroyer, and that ship that we had a very high morale level, and lo and behold, we won the Battle Efficiency Award for that ship, which is by this time, of course, I'm a commander in the Navy. And back to the Pentagon again for duty, and I was fortunate to be picked for one of the high-level postgraduate schools, which was the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, which was a year's worth of schooling. And I was able to get a master's degree in MBA from George Washington University. At the same time I was in this Industrial College of the Armed Forces. My last sea duty was commanding officer of a guided missile cruiser called the USS Wainwright. And while I was captain of that ship, we did several fleet operation exercises, or fleet operations, where we were with several ships just preparing ourselves for better being able to better protect our country from a naval standpoint. And that ship now I took to Vietnam, and was at Vietnam for 2 tours on that particular ship, where we were highly qualified to control aircraft, make fighter intercepts, and stuff like that. So it was a new ship, and one of, I guess we called it a major command. And after I had finished that duty, it was back to the Pentagon again until I retired in 1973. But that's still a quick thumbnail sketch of some of my sea duty. Of course, I didn't tell you about all the ships I was on or all the jobs I had or things like that. But that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of my duty.
No, thank you for that. And so it seems like whatever you were doing, you just continued to move up in rank. Was that something, as far as, I mean, I'm not hearing a lot of, let's just say, struggle in what you do. Were you so efficient and focused on, the task at hand that you just seemed to kind of stand out? I mean, how did you continue to move from one thing to the next?
My job, I think, like everybody does, you work hard, you try to get along, and when you're in a command position, you're a leader, so to speak, and I think you're interested in what you call a high performance level, and you do all within your power to, say, perform at your peak. And in order to do that, when you've got, say, 500 or 600 men under your command, you try to, say, stimulate those people to do the same type of job that you're doing, do your very best. And you create that type of environment to say that I think it makes just promotions easy. So when I became eligible for all my promotions, I made my promotions on time, which, you know, you sort of happy with yourself that you've been promoted at the time that you become eligible or when you're due. So I was a big guy for high morale, motivate all the people you possibly could. And we have several examples of where examples of, say, motivating, say, individuals, motivating groups, motivating a total ship. So I didn't mean to say that I was some kind of genius or some kind of something out of orbit or what have you, but just felt like you need to do your very best. And the competition was great, and you just sought to do your very best with every task that you were assigned to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Every day you wake up and do the best you can. And I would imagine if you're in charge of a lot of men and you're speaking, well, you continue to get better and better at that and it sounds like, I mean, you had plenty of practice for the time that you were in the Navy.
Well, one of the things that the small ships did was put you in a position to learn, I think, a little quicker than if you were on a great big ship like a fresh out of school on an aircraft carrier where you get 6,000 men, say, versus a destroyer where you had, say, 400 men. There's a big difference in assuming responsibility at a earlier age, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because when you started out, were you like 18 or 19 when you got into the Navy? Or were you after college? It was your early 20s.
I was 20.
Okay.
But now, see, I was in college for 3 years getting my commission after, you know, my sophomore, junior, and senior year.
Mm-hmm.
So I got commissioned when I was 20 years old, and I retired, I think, when I was 50.
Okay. And with I'd say with the life experience, with the work experience you have, and just knowing you, and you know, how attention to detail and how well you do things, what would you say to people that are of this generation that are growing up, that are let's just say that are young, you know, that are teenagers or just young 20s or so?
That's a difficult thing. Now, one of the things that we'd had going on in the Navy from the time you get in, or at least after the war was over, you had enlistment problems, re-enlistment problems, and so forth. Anytime that we had a person whose enlistment expired, I made it a point to say, have a meeting with them and just say, you know, do you know what you're doing? And of course, some people want to get out right away. Some people are really sort of mixed up or confused on what's the best thing for them to do.
Mm.
But anybody that said that they were going to go to higher education, I pushed that to the limit. Anytime that you're going to do something to better your education status, go for it. Because one of the things that I think has hurt our country a tremendous amount is the lack of people that are not interested in furthering their learning ability. Now, there's certain, you met my brother Otto somewhere along the line. Now, Otto was more of a mechanic than I was, and he was big in vocational education, and of course turned out to be vice president of a big community college in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he was very conscious, and of course made me more conscious of it than I was, that a lot of people are not super students, so to speak, but have a tremendous ability today to do electrical work, carpenter work, welding, various trades, so to speak. They're very valuable to our country, and there's no substitute for those people doing their very best. And I think I promoted that with all the ability that I had to say, encourage people to say, get an education. And if you're not a college material type, hey, do your best with your vocational skills and so forth. And I think right today, it's difficult to talk to, say, somebody in the 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th grade on how to handle your future life, because there's so many opportunities available for people today that it's just unbelievable what you can do depending on your motivation, depending on what you're interested in, or how much you're interested in loyalty to our country and things like that. So I don't know if I've answered your questions well enough, but I think you get the drift that that you need to say, make moves to better yourself, regardless of what your profession is.
Yeah, absolutely. You spent I guess you would have got out of the Navy at, how old were you when you got out of the Navy?
50 years old.
50 years old. Okay. And so then you had, you're 99 now. So then after that, with the 49 years, did you, and so you were retired. So then did you, and you had already started a family. Did you focus your attention on, like, you have the bird dog, you actually founded the Bird Dog Hall of Fame. So was that where a lot of your focus went? It was your hunting and
Well,
and Gary, I can't see you right now. I don't know if you click the button to stop the video, but I can't see you.
I think we had a
Amber Alert.
Amber Alert here. But
Okay.
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. But what happened when I retired? My dad loved to bird hunt, as did my grandfather. And every time I got a chance to bird hunt, why, I did. But now, once I retired, bird hunting I became almost addicted to it. Lo and behold, after I had bird hunted a while, I met up with some of the field trial people, and had a couple of very good dogs. One that actually was 11 times champion in 4 or 5 different game birds and so forth. And now that dog is in the Field Trial Hall of Fame. But then I had, one of my tasks while I was on active duty was teaching NROTC at the University of North Carolina. And one of the subjects that I had to teach was naval history. And even in high school, I enjoyed history. And then teaching naval history, I enjoyed very much. So I got interested in sort of the history of bird dogs, because they're such trainable animals, and they're the things that you hunted with, and you field trialing is sort of like a little level above a dog that just points spurs and hunts for you and so forth. That I got this urge to say, hey, we need to honor these bird dogs. And that was the motivation, I think, for starting the National Bird Dog Museum, which we chose Grand Junction, Tennessee, because this is the area which, starting back in 1800s, was a very prominent area for people I call them Yankees, that came down from the north to bird hunting in the area. Of course, field trialing soon became a big sport that started in this country, in Tennessee, and in this particular area where we are. And that's why we chose Grand Junction as the place to build this museum. Now, we started out with a building of 4,800 square feet because that's a building that we thought we could say underwrite the cost of it. But in other words, hey, we could collect enough money to build a 4,800 square feet building. And we call that building the National Bird Dog Museum. And we made a section of it capable to, I call it the displaying the Field Trial Hall of Fame exhibit. Now, that exhibit consisted of the people and the dogs at that particular time that had been elected to the Field Trial Hall of Fame, but there was no place to say, hang the picture of the dog or the portrait of the person and the portrait of the dog. So that little museum of 4,800 square feet became a museum itself, plus a place to exhibit that Field Trial Hall of Fame. But within 2 years, our little museum and the Field Trial Hall of Fame was completely saturated with display items that we collected enough money to build a separate building, of course, attached to that first 4,800 square feet. Another 4,800 square feet that we call the Field Trial Hall of Fame, which we were able to say, put up all the portraits, pictures, photographs, memorabilia, and so forth of field trial dogs, field trial people, field trial memorabilia. So we ended up now with 2 buildings of 4,800 square feet. And then my interest in education came to the fore, which we got what we call from the Internal Revenue Service, a 501c3 capability, which allowed us to say grant scholarships to kids. And we required these kids to write essays on outdoor subjects of their choosing. And then they were judged and were given scholarship money. Started out with a very low level and ended up with $1,000. And then we ended up with 2 scholarships, $1,500 and $1,000. And now we have 3 scholarships that are donated to children in the particular counties that we live in. One is $2,000, one is $1,500, and another $1,000. So that took care of our education capability. And then we had another little program there. We had art for grammar grades and for high school kids, which was very popular. And a lot of the kids participated in that. So here we are, completely legal now, with 3 new buildings, 3 relatively new buildings of 4,800 square foot each. Lo and behold, we had, the flushing dogs represented. We had the retrieving dogs represented. We had the pointers and setters represented. In other words, we recognized something like 40 different breeds of dogs that could be categorized as bird dogs.
Wow.
Retriever people apparently had more money than they knew what to do with. So we built a 4th building around the quadrangle, so to speak. And that building highlights a little museum specifically for retrievers, and a Field Trial Hall of Fame specifically for retriever people, which gave us 4 buildings. And then lo and behold, we had other breeds of dogs that wanted more space to exhibit their people and their dogs. So we've added a 6,000 square feet area to represent those dogs. So the whole museum complex now, or we call it the Bird Dog Foundation complex, is something like 30,000 square feet undercover.
Wow.
So that takes care of why I'm in Tennessee and why I was interested in the museum, and this is what we've got. So did you actually go to the museum when you were here?
I did. I've been there. Yeah,
well, now,
it's impressive.
but all that's that last building gave us something like 30,000 square feet under cover. So we've added a lot of stuff since you were here.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't remember it being that big. That's incredible. So did you have to then raise a lot of that money, and how did you do that?
Okay. We do through our magazine prescriptions, where people are interested in dogs. We started I guess you would call it almost an advertising capability, or a notice of what was going on. We just started telling people what we had. And we specifically said, hey, if you're interested, why make donations. And we had a lot of loyal, dedicated people that were interested in field trials. They were interested in dogs, and I think we had a lot of ego cranked into the system too, which people were willing to say, hey, you recognize me and I'll give you some money. So that accounts for what went on. Now, one of the things that we did early on is your Aunt Sally was very helpful in letter writing and computer capabilities in keeping names and situations organized. And we put on several fundraising drives where after each of these buildings completed and dedicated, they were completely paid for.
Wow.
In addition to, say, having several $1,000s to pay underwriting scholarships, we have an endowment fund well over $1 million to sustain the survivability of the place for almost in perpetuity. Wow,
that's awesome. And so as the founder, and when was it actually founded?
Well, and we actually started working seriously on it in 1988, but the first building was dedicated like in 1991. And 2 years later, the Field Trial Hall of Fame building, and then 2 years later than that, the building that we call the Education Building was dedicated. And then in 2004, I believe, we dedicated a Retriever Building. And then 3 or 4 years after that, we did the fifth building, which got us up to the 30,000 square feet.
Okay, wow. And so as the founder now, and so we're talking about 30 years now from 91, do you still play a role or a significant role in what goes on there?
I was president for 10 years, and I'd been attached for several years after that. But now I keep in contact with what's going on now, but I have no official role other than occasionally I donate a few dollars to the thing. And in my trust, I think I've set aside a few dollars for them when I pass away, that they'll get a few dollars out of my estate.
Awesome. And so that's amazing what it's become. Is it grown in a proportion that is kind of beyond your wildest dreams when you started it?
When we started, that first building was sort of our dream. Hey, we just need a building. We need, we can pay for 4,800 square feet. So that was the dream. So nearly everything has been added since that time has been beyond our expectations.
That's so cool. And so I would imagine that you have people that have not only come from all over the country to visit, maybe even around the world. So in some regards, in that circle, you're probably a bit of a celebrity, but it must be really cool to have people coming from all over to visit.
Well, now what I did, and I don't mean to say keep patting myself on the back, but I did travel to all the 48 states, telling people what we had. And the fundraising has been a low-key operation. In other words, we just say, here's what we've got, and here's where we want to go. And that, I think, stimulated a lot of people to give. Now, we've had people come here from Japan, China, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, France, Italy. I don't know, all kind of parts of the world. That dogs are, in other words, people look at dogs as man's best friend, but now hunting is something that takes place all over the world, one way or another. And you've got people that that hunt to put food on the table. You got people that hunt and shoot for sport and what have you. So I think you sort of got a feel for it's a worldwide interest in dogs. And if you look at the American Kennel Club, they registered hundreds and hundreds of different breeds of dogs. My grandfather was born like in 1872, and he was addicted to hunting. And he did it for 2 or 3 reasons. He enjoyed it. And he hunted with coon dogs. He hunted with bird dogs. He hunted with, he'd kill a turkey for Thanksgiving, a wild turkey that is. And then I mentioned that my father was born like in 1900. And not only did he not necessarily take good care of his family, but he's really spent all of the hunting season bird hunting, regardless of whether he was earning a living or not. And then I come along, born in 1922, and started bird hunting when I was 6 or 7 years old with him, and then started shooting when I was 12 years old. I mentioned your Uncle Arch. He came along in 1924. He was an addict, bird hunting, as was your Uncle Otto, and all of us have had dogs forever, and we've hunted since we were born almost. And in fact, I don't recall from the time I was born until my dad died that he didn't have bird dogs. In other words, one of the first things I remember, in fact, I remember the first bird dog I remember when I first remembered anything. We had a dog named Guy, G-U-Y, and I remember when old Guy died, and then I remembered when my dad got one of the first dogs he had was a black and white setter named Rex. Now, Rex turned out to be an old dog, and my dad didn't want to go hunting with the dog, so he'd come home like at 1 o'clock, and he'd tell mother to lock up old Rex because I don't want old Rex to go hunting with me because I might have to drag him home as an old worn out dog. So off he would go with the good dogs and leave Rex tied. So after about an hour, mother turned old Rex out, and Rex trailed my father for 3 or 4 miles and joined in the hunt. That's how eager he was to hunt. And it's just a typical example of how loyal a dog is and how eager they are to do what they were born and bred for, to bird hunt. So
And when you talk about the bird dog and what's being hunted, is it typically just quail and pheasant? Is that typically the
Well, no,
two, or is it more?
I've hunted quail, I've hunted pheasants, I've hunted sharp-tailed grouse, I've hunted prairie chickens, I've hunted chuckers, I've hunted Hungarian partridge.
You're forgetting woodcock.
Hey, I've hunted woodcock. Uh, I've hunted ducks. I've hunted geese. So
A
you
lot.
probably,
Mhm.
when did you ever get any work done? But now that was after I retired. I did what my hobbies had sort of cranked me up for. Says, okay, now you've worked for 30 years. Now let's loaf for 30 years of doing some of your hobby stuff. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm gonna switch it a little bit here. So you are 100% Cherokee Native American.
No, I really, I'm not sure about 100%, but now
Okay.
we were born as Indians,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought we were Cherokees until 1956,
Mm-hmm.
which we had a certain bunch of people in the Pembroke area that lived along a river called the Lumber River, Lumber, lumber, because apparently a long time ago they floated lumber down that river, you know, to sawmills and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And they, some of them were said they were Cherokee, some said they were Tuscarora, some said they were other Indians.
Mm.
So they came up with a, I don't know what you call it, petition or what, but one of the elders, long time after I've left Pembroke, came up and says, we've got a new name for the Indians of that whole county and the surrounding counties, and it's the Lumbee, which is a short name for lumber. You with me so far?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the tribe now is recognized as Lumbees. Now, there's a tremendous story about the lost colony that John White sent over here to Roanoke Island. You remember back in what, 1600s or what have you?
Okay.
That lost colony, in other words, let me start over again. The English tried to establish a footing in the North American continent. They sent over a ship with, I've forgotten, seemed like 40 some odd people in it. And they settled in Roanoke Island, North Carolina. And that group was supposed to be resupplied, you know, like the next year. But something happened in England, I think against the French, that they were not able to resupply that first colony. So lo and behold, when they were able to establish or to come back with reinforcements or with additional people, that colony was no longer present, and they had just they had left some evidence there, like they chopped the name on a tree, some particular words. So nobody knows to this day, because the verbal history, the recorded history is non-existent, but there's a tremendous amount of theoretical thought that lost colony actually moved inland and mingled with the Indians, which would mean that there were no full-blooded Indians because of the presence of the white people from England. And their names of that colony is available, and there's all types of stories about that lost colony, which people have opinions, people have views, people have some man-made evidence, I guess you'd call it, that that lost colony, when they didn't get resupplied, mixed in with the Indians. So you would never have 100% Cherokee. You'd have, and you look at the people today, you've got dark skin, you've got light skin, you've got all types of situations where it's not positive of who is 100% Indian and who is not until you go out west where you got various tribes that were out there with no injection from foreign elements and so forth. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So the name Lockee, I mean, obviously I'm a Lockee, but it's just because of my grandmother remarrying your brother Arch Lockee when my dad had already been born and was a little boy. But the name Lockee itself, what's the history there?
Okay, let's go back now. I have, and I gave it to which one of your brothers? Aaron. I think I gave Aaron. I have got 16 or 7 generations of what Lockees were. We originally were Lockleers. In other words, from England came in 17, I want to say approximately 1760. It was a Lockleer, came from England. It settled in North Carolina. And a little later, another Lockleer came from England, and they were related. Now, we have the Lockleer name prevalent until 1917 or 18, I believe. Now, my grandfather was born as a Lockleer in that long chain of Lockleers. Now, when he was in North Carolina, he was very active. That's my grandfather now, my biological grandfather. He had worked with getting the Indians of Robinson County recognized, just like the Indians out west, the Hopis, the Siouans, the 100, there's 100 different tribes in the country. And most of them are recognized by the federal government, but the ones in North Carolina, for some reason, because I think of a mixture of whites and the Indians, were never recognized as a bona fide tribe. Now, my grandfather worked with getting those people recognized from the time he was a young man until he was something like 40, maybe 45 years of age. And at that time, he was called to be a minister and decided that, hey, I've got to give up all of this stuff that I've been doing. He was a farmer, sawmiller, and what have you. But when he became a ordained minister, he gave up this business of trying to say, get his tribe recognized. And then he says, if I'm going to go in the ministry, I'm going to go with a new name. So he is the guy that changed our tribal name from Lockleer to Lockee. So you're a Lockee because of the efforts of my grandfather.
And what was his first name?
Orange Spencer Lockleer, and he turned out to be Orange Spencer Lockee because he officially changed his name.
Arren? How do you spell the first name?
Arren, and I think your brother spells his a little different.
Yeah, he's Aaron. Okay,
yeah.
Interesting. Wow. And so did you, growing up as, I guess I won't say Cherokee, but Native American, and all the endeavors that you went into, did you find that it was difficult, or that you were
Okay,
judged?
I think I can address what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Where I grew up, there was 3 different people recognized.
Mm-hmm.
You were white, you were black, or you were Indian.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, we had 3 three different types of people with 3 different names.
Sure.
In other words, the white people overpowered the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
The Indians followed the whites, overpowering the blacks to a small degree.
Mm.
And you had the blacks. If you went to a train station, for example, you had a waiting room for whites and you had a waiting room for blacks.
Mm.
But now the Indians, in a lot of cases, were looked upon as a third. What do we want to say?
Yeah,
a
third
third
people or a third race or nationality.
In other words, and if you look at the education,
Mm-hmm.
now you say, let's take North Carolina, for example. North Carolina had a state education system of where the state furnished textbooks
Mm-hmm.
for the students.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the white people got the new books. After more new books came out, the Indians got those trade-off books. In other words, were passed down to the Indians.
Mm.
Indians no longer used those books. They were placed down to the blacks.
Mm.
So we have some people that feel like we were really a second-class generation or a second-class people.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt a little of that stigma myself, but now once I moved to South Carolina and went to the University of South Carolina, I'm competing against all white people. In the Navy, I'm competing against all white people. But I don't think anybody looked at me other than, hey, you're a naval officer, I'm a naval officer. Hey, you got to do your job, we do our job.
Mm.
I don't know if I've clarified enough of that you understand the whole picture. But the Indians, even to this day, are looked at as a government. In other words, hey, you look to the government for your whole livelihood.
Mm.
Thankfully, I have never had to do that since I have been an adult.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an unfortunate situation with a lot of the places that Native Americans grow up. If it's on their reservations, and then there's problems within there, whether that's education or drinking or whatever the case may be, perhaps drugs. Do you see that? Is there a solution to that you see that would help things out? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, now what's happening in North Carolina? Let's just say, look at North Carolina, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The Lumbee Indians are scattered all over the world now.
Mm.
But the majority of them are in Robeson County and the surrounding counties around Robeson County. That's where the majority of them are. But now they have increased in numbers now, with such great numbers, like almost 60,000 in that North Carolina area, to say nothing about those that live in foreign places. For example, we've got Lockees now, we're picking on Lockees now for a bit. We've got Lockees in California. We've got Lockees in Nebraska. We've got Lockees in South Carolina. We've got Lockees in Florida. We got Lockees in nearly almost all the states. But it's only a few compared to the nucleus that's in Robeson County. Now they own their own banks now.
Hmm.
There's doctors, there's lawyers, there's PhD educators, there's nurses and what have you. So they have grown in numbers. They've grown in education now. Like at school, it was a 2-year college at one stage of the game, is an arm of the University of North Carolina now, the greater system of North Carolina. And even we've got some Lockees in Australia. I've got some evidence of Lockees in North Australia. Now we've got some relatives in close to St. Raphael, California.
San Rafael, yep, that's close to me. Mhm.
And we've got some down in the San Diego area.
Mhm.
We've got some in Tennessee and so forth. But now I've sort of shotgunned the whole thing. Have I left an area sort of void that needs a little bit more explanation?
No, I guess my question about that was just with everything that's happening still on reservations where, you know, a lot of Native Americans are, whether they're lacking in education or they're having issues with alcohol or drugs on these reservations. If you had something where you think, you know, a solution to what needs to happen in those places.
Well, now, Sally and I, since we've been married for 30 years, have traveled to several of those bona fide Indian reservations, recognized completely by the U.S. government, where you've seen the housing, where you've seen the schools, where you've seen their hospitals and so forth. And unfortunately, some of the saddest things happen when you expect a handout. In other words, you don't have a job, you don't want a job because you're satisfied with the tidbit of help you get from the government. Consequently, you don't have a job, you don't want a job, so you succumb to, I think what you're alluding to, drugs, people that really don't care, alcohol. In other words, if you don't have something to hang on to, it's easy to see why a person succumbs to drugs. I mean, it's hard for me to understand because, you know, if you've never touched it, you've never been interested, you've always had something to do, you've always been busy, you've always tried to stand for something. But if you stand for nothing, and just like right now, I don't care about what your politics are, but I really feel like that we've got a labor shortage now because we've handed out too much money for people not to work. And we've got examples of it that I even saw when I was in Texas hunting, where here was a guy that had a big ranch operation, a big store that sold everything that you could think about, the hardware, pumps, dog food, cattle food, support ranch operation. He needed a new employee, and one of the guys came in, he didn't have a job, or it was and he says, "Hey, I need somebody to help me work." This guy says, "Well, I'm willing to take a job." Well, he says, "Well, they arranged something like $17 an hour, I believe it was." And he says, "Well, can you start working Monday?" The guy said, "Yeah, I'll be there Monday." Monday came and he didn't show up. Tuesday came and he didn't show up. He called the guy and says, "Hey, I thought you were coming in yesterday to start work." He says, "Well, I went home and talked with my wife. We're getting $15 an hour not to work, and $15 we're getting along okay, not working." So they didn't need the $17 now. But apparently now, just based on, we listen to a lot of news from a lot of stations, both conservative and a liberal.
Mm.
But we've got all kinds of people now that are getting $600 and $700 a month to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the South, a person can live on $400 or $500 a month. In New York, you need probably more than $700 or $800 a month to live.
Right.
And I'm having trouble identifying poverty in our country because we've got something like over 50 million people on food stamps.
Mm.
Everybody that gets Social Security, which is really an entitlement now, it's not something. But here again, you got all of these people that are getting checks for doing nothing plus food stamps. So I'm having trouble finding somebody that can tell me who is a poverty case when you go by somebody's house at 10 o'clock in the morning and there's 4 or 5 guys sitting on the porch and there's a 50-gallon drum sitting outside and it's full of beer cans. In other words, hey, they're drinking beer at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're drinking beer at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't know what they're doing at night, but we have a tremendous amount of that in the country. And it sort of just shakes you up into say, what is going to happen to our country in the future when we're giving away money and we've got 20 ships off along Long Beach or
California,
trying to get this containers unloaded on them, and we don't even have once the container is ashore, you don't have a truck hook up to it to haul it off. In other words, certainly you see that from your standpoint out there if you listen to any part of the news. And I just can't see us quite getting ourselves together. So how can you tell a young guy how to improve himself? You can tell him, but if he doesn't have the will, the motivation, the power, and the willingness to do it on your own or to be proud of something, hey, how can you get there from here?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess you got to have the motivation to want to get the most out of life, right? I guess some people, if they're getting a handout, that's good enough for them. Yeah, and it's hard to take those people and say, hey, you could do better. Yeah, it's a, I don't know, it's a tough one, that's for sure. A question I have for you is something I've recently heard or found was that thousands of people that have been interviewed on their deathbed, and two of the very common answers that people say are, I wish that I had lived a life that I wanted to live and didn't live it because of what other people wanted me to live, basically, doing and what others expected of them. And then another one is that I wish I would have let myself be happier. So, from those two commonalities, living a life that you choose to live, not a life that you have other people what they expect of you, and then living a life that, hey, like I choose to be happy. You're somebody that, well, you've chosen it, for the most part, it seems like you've chosen what you've wanted to do, and you're about as happy as anyone I've met. And so I guess what would you attribute if somebody's like, well, I want to live the life that I design and I want to be happy? What would be your thoughts on that for someone that's young that wants to know?
Well, that's a good question. And, if you find something that you like to do, you'll never have to work another day in your life.
Right.
Think that for just a second. You can find something that you enjoy doing, something that you you look forward to it instead of dreading that it's going to happen to you. You'll have to work another day in your life.
That's very true. And did you feel that way a lot of times when you were in the Navy?
Well, I think I did and didn't know it.
If you had to go back in time and give your, let's just say, give your younger self, maybe you were in high school or around that age when you were a teenager, and you had to give yourself a bit of advice from yourself now, what do you think that you'd tell yourself?
Well, I think, Ryan, once I was old enough to do something, I think I was expected to do it. Like in a farm situation, in other words, there's something to do at nearly any age that you become in a farm situation. In other words, you don't have to be 30 years old to pick cotton. You don't have to be 20 years old to set out transplant tobacco. You don't have to be 30 years old to plow a mule. This is the day before we had tractors and all this fancy equipment and so forth. But I think starting out with a bona fide work ethic is very important to anybody and everybody. I think if you look at people that have just floated through life unguided, no motivation, no desire to improve themselves, really don't improve themselves. But if you say, feel like you're somebody, that you're contributing to yourself, you're contributing to your family, you're contributing to your country, contributing to mankind, so to speak, you don't have time for some of this, I guess what we're calling do nothing, amount to nothing type of environment that we got in several parts of our country.
Yeah, that to me sounds like, I mean, if you have a strong work ethic and you're doing something that's bigger than just yourself, you know, you're working for your family, your community, your country, but something that's not just about yourself. I mean, that's really important. And just on a side note, do you have something that you've done for years, let's say like in the morning, where you kind of have a morning routine that gets you going, that gets you to be in, I guess, in a good mindset or in physically in good shape? Like, have you had some kind of a practice in the morning?
Well, I'm not sure it is quite as strict as I may be interpreting what you're saying, but you just felt like you need to do better with yourself. For example, I worked my way through college for everything except for, I think, 75 bucks. I think I got 75 bucks aid for 4 years of college plus a master's degree. My work ethic was such that, hey, there's no way to get ahead except by your own effort. And I'm not sure that I had as rigid thoughts as you probably mentioned that applied to me, but I just feel like I needed to do better, and I tried to do better, and maybe in the end result, I did better. But here again, I might have done a lot better had I tried a lot harder. Okay, you just never know what your potential is if you get with it, so to speak.